Well, I think the biggest number today, Nina, is 26 billion. That's how much taxes are going up by overall. And if we look at some of the main drivers of that, the freeze on income tax thresholds, the stealth tax, that's 8 billion of it. Raid on pensions, 4.7 billion. Raid on savers, couple of billion. Electric car owners, you're going to have to start paying a mileage tax. That's going to be raising 1.4 billion pounds. By the way, the fuel duty freeze for other cars is also going to be phased out from next September. You can expect lots of unhappiness about that in the papers. Elsewhere, what have we got? We've got a gambling tax, more gambling taxes, 1.1 billion. Better tax collection and administration, raising 2.3 billion, Chancellor? Will it? We've heard that one before. And then some of the other taxes that we've heard about, like the mansion tax, there's one which we've talked a bit about, but it's only raising about £500 million, not all that much. What's it going on? Well, spending by the end of this Parliament will be about £32 billion more, but £11 billion of that will be as a result of the changes that the Chancellor made today, mostly down to benefits. So, well, I mean, some of that wasn't done today, was it? The winter fuel U-turn, the disability benefit U-turn, those had already been done. But today's scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, that adds 3 billion to it, to the absolute delight of the Labour backbenchers. There will be savings too, £5 billion of savings, the Chancellor reckons, from things like abolishing police and crime commissioners. And interestingly, we'll be watching this closely, she thinks she will be saving a bit of money on the special educational needs budget as it's taken out of the control of councils and into central government. Now, here is why we are paying so much more in tax for not all that much more spending. This is what GDP was expected to be in March, and then here is what the OBR now expects the growth in our economy to be. Guess which bit of this chart the Chancellor talked about? Yep, it was that bit this year when we're doing better. But over the whole of the rest of the period, GDP is lower than the OBR was expecting it to be. It's not all the government's fault. A lot of it is down to poor productivity, which they could have factored in at any stage. But this is just embarrassing, frankly, for a government which has said that growth is its #1 priority because it's getting worse. So, at the end of all this, where does that leave us? Well, the OBR thinks that the headroom the Chancellor is going to have is now going to be £22 billion. That's up from £10 billion last time around, which was always considered to be far too slim. So this time she's put in 22 billion, which means there's a better chance of her managing to hit her targets. What chance do the OBR give her of hitting her targets? 59%. It doesn't sound that much, does it? Doesn't sound like they've got a great deal of faith, but that is still more than last time around. And that's because of all the risks that could still upset this budget in the future, Nina.
Let's get reaction from MPs now. We can go live to the Houses of Parliament where our political reporter Jasmine Cameron-Chileshi is in the lobby. Jasmine, initial reaction from MPs of all parties. What have they been saying?
So there was a lot in the budget to woo Labour MPs, many of whom argue that the party is going to be judged on whether or not people felt better off after this budget. Now, the scrapping of the two-child limit in particular has been really popular. We heard that received the loudest number of cheers in the Chamber. Other proposals, such as the freezing of welfares, increasing of minimum wage, expansion of free school meals, all of that is going to be seen by Labour MPs as a sign that the government is prioritising those on the lowest incomes. But while MPs may be welcoming some of the content of the budget, there's been quite a bit of criticism about how all of this has been communicated. Even as recently as earlier today, when we saw that leak from the OBR, obviously it wasn't the government's error, but there's been some frustration about that. We spoke to a couple of MPs coming out of the Chamber who essentially said, this is quite a big mistake by the OBR. And more generally, the communication leading up to the budget has really lowered morale. One MP told me that the rollout of this budget has essentially been a bit of a shambles. And I think, thirdly, there's a general feeling among a lot of Labour MPs that the government really needs to get better at communication, outlining what it stands for, who it stands for, what it's trying to say to the public. Now many of MPs have seen the budget. They're going to be poring over the detail. They'll be speaking to fellow parliamentarians, and they're really going to want to get a sense from voters as well about how all of this has landed with the public and what this means for the party standing more generally.
Jasmine, Cameron Cheleshi, thank you very much. Robert, look, on this issue of what we were predicting, what had been predicted about the lifting of the two-child cap on benefits, obviously lots of Labour MPs welcoming that, as Jasmine was saying, and campaigners for child poverty will also welcome it. Nobody wants to see children in poverty. It does lead to an increase in the welfare spending bill.
Yeah, I mean, I've just looked at the 5-year projections for welfare spending, and the numbers we're talking about are genuinely sort of eye-watering. This year, the OBR expects us to spend £333 billion on all aspects of welfare, but within 5 years, they're expecting a rise of well over £70 billion to £406 billion. Now, you know, Rachel Reeves herself accepted only a few months ago that this rate of increase was completely unsustainable. You know, £70 billion, that increase over those years is, you know, more than we spend on schools. It's more than we spend on defence. It's also, you know, when people are polled about, you know, should their tax, you know, revenue, should the tax they pay go on welfare, most people say no, it shouldn't. So it is something that the government knows it's got to get under control, but its backbenchers you know, rebelled against what was frankly a pretty modest set of reforms. All they were planning, all they were really expecting to save just from those reforms was £5 billion of the £70 billion increase. They couldn't even get that through. So you know, this remains you know, a big economic headache for the government. The government's hope is you know, that they're doing a review of how to help people who have various disabilities get back into work. They're hoping that that review will come up with some credible proposals. They've recently appointed a man called Alan Milburn, who was the health secretary in the previous Labour government under Tony Blair, to review an associated problem, which is the sheer number of young people who are not in education, employment or training, so-called NEETs. There's about 1 million of those. And, you know, that is both wasted opportunity and, you know, in terms of, you know, businesses would dearly love to have, more skilled young people available to work. But equally, it's a potentially a sort of massively long-term social problem for the UK, because the longer you're unemployed as a young person, the greater the risk that you'll never be in productive work. So this is a really thorny an important problem for the government, but I'm afraid in terms of measures to solve these very big social and economic problems, it is work in progress. We haven't got solutions.
Yeah, Joel, and on the issue of young people, with the minimum wage rise that was announced yesterday for 18 to 20-year-olds, even the likes of the think tank, the Resolution Foundation, is saying that could actually backfire. It seems like good news for young people, but it could lead to more businesses having to make more job losses because they simply can't afford to pay that rate, or they just employ 40-year-olds on the same salary.
Yeah, I mean, the logic of the difference between the rate is that somehow age confers wisdom and experience, which isn't always the case, but there was a logic of sorts to it. The government wants to align the two rates, and I think, yeah, even those organisations who really care about living standards and people on low income and starting out in work have concerns about doing that for exactly the point that you make. I think one of the things that stands out from this budget is, for me, some of the numbers here is like £26 billion raised in tax. This is a party that went into the last election promising tax rises of £8 billion to deliver on its manifesto pledges. In her first budget, Rachel Reeves raised taxes by £40 billion. and now she's raised them by £26 billion, so total 66 billion instead of 8. So I think, governments that promise to do one thing in opposition and do something very different in power, there's challenges there, right, for public trust. The way in which she's raising taxes is really interesting. We were led up the garden path on income tax rate rises. She's backed away from that in the end. It's the freeze and the threshold, 3 years, not 2, to personal tax thresholds, raises significant sums, draws very significant numbers of people into paying income tax at all, and almost 1 million people into the additional higher 40% rate of income tax. Now, by not saying, look, everyone's going to be paying a little bit more, and instead saying, OK, we're going to freeze thresholds in future, and for now we're targeting a smaller number of people for an awful lot more money, raises the risk that actually you don't get that, because some of the people that the Chancellor is targeting are very well resourced, they're very well advised, and I think the timing of some of these changes. You can't move a house in a £5 million home in Kensington and Chelsea, but you can move some assets around. And I think there have to be question marks about how deliverable some of the tax rises the Chancellor has announced today, how deliverable they actually are.
And on those tax rises, Robert, where we're seeing so many more people in the years to come moving into the higher rate tax. I mean, the percentage of change is astonishing, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you and I talked about this only a couple of weeks ago on the basis of a 3-year freeze in those tax thresholds. The Office of Budget Responsibility is saying that 24% of British people in work will be paying the 40% or the 45% rate of tax. So that's basically, 1 in 4 of us will be paying, what was historically regarded as a very high rate of tax. That was 1 in 25 of us, just 4% of people in the early 1990s. So this is a really significant increase. And I think I'm right in saying in just the last few years, I think the last 10 years or so, almost the increase has been something like 9 percentage points. So we may, have governments that have been committed to keeping those thresholds in the same place. So, one of the things she was thinking about doing, the Chancellor, wasn't thinking about doing, it was a plan, which we talked about repeatedly here on ITV. I talked about repeatedly on ITV. She did have a plan to increase the basic rate of tax. She backed away because she was terrified of the political backlash, because it would have been a very explicit breaking of her manifesto pledge. But she is nonetheless forcing very, very large numbers of people to pay. I mean, in just 3 or 4 years, she will, from this policy, raise an extra £8 billion worth of tax from millions and millions of people. And only a year ago, if you just listen to what she said in the House of Commons, only a year ago at the last budget, she basically accepted that freezing thresholds was, if not breaking the letter of her manifesto commitment, she basically admitted that she was breaking the spirit of that manifesto commitment. So I suspect there will be quite a lot of anger that she's done this.
And quick answer, if you will,
Yeah,
because I want to bring Jane in. Am I right in thinking that we were thinking she was going to extend the freeze for 2 years, but actually she's done that for 3 years?
Yeah, she's added an extra year on the end, which means the amount that she will raise goes up by another £2 billion in that third year.
Jane, what does all this mean for this crucial issue of trust in the Chancellor, in the Prime Minister, in the Labour Party, historically a party that lots of people have said they don't trust with the economy?
So it's really, really important, isn't it, to think about the kind of long-term context here. So if we think about how Labour got to power in 2024, they did that on a very historically small share of the vote for a governing party. They didn't start with a load of trust. And we're in a context where disillusionment in politics is rife. That's why people are moving to other parties. And particularly, I think there's two core problems here. One is, do we trust you? And are you competent and all the rest of it? And are you keeping your promises? And the other is, do we know what you stand for? And it's the problem with both of those two things combined that people look at the mainstream parties. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of change. They look at those two mainstream parties and they think, well, I don't quite know who you represent and who you're for, and I don't quite know if I trust you. And of course, that's why we're seeing very broad splintering of political support right across the political spectrum. I thought it was notable that the Chancellor was talking about reform and talking about the Greens and taking pop shots at Zach Polansky and all the rest of it in her budget speech, which I don't remember ever hearing before, targeting these smaller parties. And it's particularly in that context. So, do I think that this budget and all of the difficulties and the shambles around it have eroded further public trust? No. I think they are confirming people's general sense of disillusionment with the largest parties. And of course, the big question then is, does any of this work? So of course, if growth were to improve against the forecasts, and if people's living standards were indeed to improve, then perhaps, then people will give somewhat of a benefit of the doubt. But I think just going back to the tax threshold question, we have to, again, put this into the broader context. Why are people so worried about their finances? Well, it's not just because they're not getting enough income. It's not just because they're paying too much tax. It's because they're worried about being able to afford housing, their mortgage repayments. It's because they've got outgoings because they have greater numbers of children or just any children. It's also because they don't have, many people have used up their buffers and their savings in contrast to those who have been able to squirrel things away. And so you don't have that sense that people have confidence in a safety net, either in their own circumstances or in the government. So perhaps, some of the spending, the welfare budgets and all the rest of it speaks somewhat to that Labour's trying to protect the most vulnerable. So if you were to fall on hard times, that perhaps you would be protected too. But the broader question of trust is not going to go away quickly. We're in a major kind of slow and gradual decline in voters' trust for the mainstream parties.
OK, Jane, for now, thank you. Lots more analysis from Jane, Robert and Joel in a minute. First, though, we brought you the initial reaction from the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. But as she went on, there was this very pointed and very personal criticism of the Chancellor.
All we've had is wallowing in self-pity and whining about misogyny and mansplaining. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me explain to the Chancellor, woman to woman. People out there aren't complaining because she's female. They're complaining because she is utterly incompetent. Yeah!
Robert, what's your reaction to that criticism there of Rachel Reeves from Kemi Badenoch, which is nothing to do with what she's announced today?
Well, if I'm honest with you, I was slightly surprised that Rachel Reeves, before the budget, went to see Labour MPs, and she tried to frame much of the criticism that she's faced in recent weeks as a manifestation of misogyny. And I have to say, I spoke to a number of Labour MPs. There obviously is an enormous amount of misogyny in politics, but they didn't feel that the kind of criticism she's recently faced has been based on sexism, and it's been based on the fact that she and the Treasury have been incompetent. Now, it is the case that there's a particular slur people use about her. With the Tories, a lot of Tory men have decided to, over a period of time, denigrated her as, they use this phrase, Rachel from accounts, which definitely is sexist. But actually, I think it's been perfectly reasonable, either on a party political or just an economic basis over the last few weeks, to say she could do better.
Joel, we haven't got long left. I just want to target a couple of announcements that we did know about, but they're now confirmed. So let's get some analysis from you. Firstly, for savers, ISAs, the limit you can put in without paying tax is being reduced as predicted. And also, big changes for people who have salary sacrifice pensions, big changes for individuals potentially and for companies. And as you've said quite rightly, because a lot of these are coming in the years to come, there's lots of time for lots of different groups to scrutinise and complain.
Yeah, look, I think there is going to be, the Village Green lynch mob is getting out their, people are getting out their pitchforks and they're looking through the detail and trying to work out here what they can charge at. There's a number of things. I think we still don't have confirmed the detail of this overnight stay charge that the government has rolled out, notionally to raise money for local authorities that need that revenue. Bloomberg ran a story last night suggesting it would be £2 per person per night. I think you've got hotels, theme parks, pubs who are trying to get clarity on this, because that would add quite significant sums of money, which I suspect they'd look to pass on if they could, to the cost of staying overnight. That could detonate in a way the government doesn't like. This, you mentioned the way in which property and savings are being taxed, and you're right too, because I think this is another area that's potentially quite dangerous for the government. The OBR booklet points out that by adding a 2 percentage point increase to the rate of property income tax, that's going to get passed on. There will be a knock-on effect, which landlords will try and shunt some of their extra costs onto renters. It will have an effect on rental prices. Now, the degree to which the OBR is right or wrong, we don't know yet. But what I'm saying is that there are potentially unintended consequences that could revisit. The government, when it chose to go for the series of smaller tax measures to raise $1 billion here, $2 billion there, it ran the risk of missing something in the haste to sort of get all this nailed down in time. So I think there's a number of tax rises that could yet detonate.
Okay, Jane, we've not got very long left. Did you think in terms of what you've heard from Rachel Reeves, has she prioritised politics over economics this time round?
I think she's really prioritised the economic story in politics. And for the last kind of year, you would be forgiven for thinking that the Labour Party was prioritising the very small slither of its vote base that was switching to reform and ignoring the very, very significant, much larger group of people who were going to the Greens and the Lib Dems and to Undecided and so on. So I think she's recognised that the economy is absolutely central. Will that increase their support, or has she just done maybe just enough to stop losing more support? I would say the latter. I think they're probably in the territory of avoiding further losses but not actually making many gains, but we'll see.